Welcome back to a new episode of the ELPA podcast. Today, I'm here to discuss a topic that it's really important. It's extremely important for patient advocates and patient association, that it's the integration of real-world data and real-world evidence into the EMA and EU national HTA process. And I'm not alone, of course, so together with me today we have Marco Korenjak, ELPA President. He doesn't need any introduction, I think. And then it's an honor to have two representatives from national regulatory authorities, one from Portugal and one from Greece. So welcome Sofia Tranza from Greece and Anna Sofia Martins from Portugal.
Thank you.
Without further ado, we will start getting into the topic, and we will setting the scene, looking a bit at at where we are today. So, which is the state of the art. I'm starting with you, Sofia. So, from a national regulatory perspective, that in your case it's Greece. How mature is the use of real-world data evidence in the European decision-making process nowadays?
I think I will divide maturity in 3 stages and in 3 levels. I think overall maturity is nowadays we can say that the real-world data are rapidly advancing, and they are not fully embedded in the procedures. Europe has moved from pilot projects to expanding the ecosystem for RWD, RWE, and the system is not yet mature. We know that EMA has the recent reports from EMA for RWD data says that we have a 47.5 increase in the use of RDV data, and we have 59 studies that 30 are finished and 29 are ongoing, and we have 78% feasibility of proposed RDV studies. EMA is using Darwin, which is a federal network launched in 2022. And it includes 16 countries and over 180 million patients. Also, we can say that a source for RWE data is the European Health Data Space System that is going to be expected its implementation in 2027. But overall, the maturity is still ahead. Concerning regulatory maturity, the use is medium. EMA uses RDV data inside its committees and inside its processes like orphan designations, pediatric investigation plans, like authorization applications. And concerning national maturity, we can say that that's very hard because we have a very big gap there, because we have the Nordic countries that have big technology, they have registries, they have a complete authorization system in their place, and they have HTA analysts, they have very experienced RWD data, and we have, in the other hand, countries like Greece and middle set countries that the system never existed and it never exists. So overall, we have the RDV are integrated, but they have also, we can say that they are advancing.
So if I got it correctly, integration and fragmentation are still
yes.
some needs to be overcome in the future. I forgot to tell everybody that Sofia has been involved also in the EMA work for many, many years. That's why she's also very skilled. And on this note, I forgot to say that Ana Sofia, so from Portugal, she's still involved in the EMA PRAC committee work. And so on this specific focus on the EMA, where does real-world evidence already meaningfully influence the regulatory assessments? I mean, we listen to some obstacle, but where are already?
Well, it is the undisputed gold standard for safety. So PRAC you relies on this data to monitor long-term safety, to detect rare adverse events that clinical trials, particularly in the context of rare diseases, are too small to catch. And it is also the most important data that we use to assess effectiveness of risk minimization measures. But I would say that where it is really meaningful, it is in the conditional marketing authorizations, because for many orphan drugs, we grant early approvals based on surrogate endpoints from very small clinical trials. So we need to impose post-authorization efficacy studies. And it is then using high-quality data from observational studies that from networks like ERNs that can act like as a bridge, and to prove using real-world data to prove the efficacy that was missing at the time of the launch. So without this data, it would be impossible to have access to these products, or we would have to delay their authorizations or even reject them. We also see a change also in the use of this data in the extensions of indications, so especially for pediatric patients, because sometimes it is impossible or it is unethical to perform clinical trials. So what we do is use high-quality observational data to build control arms, and so we can compare a new treatment with the natural history of the disease, or with standard of care. So without this data, it would be impossible to have new products with so easily accessible. So I would say that this data is decisive in safety and in post-marketing monitoring, but we need to move, and the next frontier is making it also very important and decisive for the initial assessment of benefit-risk balance of medicines, so to guarantee approval of new medicines.
Great. From the patient perspective, it's a topic extremely important for patients and for patient association, as we said at the beginning. But Sofia touched upon also the HTA decision making. Both regulatory and HTA decision making, in both decision making, how much is important, the outcome of real world data, and what it matters the most to patients?
So if we look at the landscape, everything has definitely improved. So in January 25, we got a new legislation where patients do need to be involved. But from the ground up, we can see that there's a very big difference between the countries. So some countries, they already involve patients in HTA processes, and they are just keeping that. And we have now a big pressure on the countries that didn't do that to develop some systems that would allow patient participation. But overall, if we look at the data that is used, especially for liver patients, so the data still relies heavily on clinical data like biomarkers, fibrosis score, histology. We are not focusing on the data on quality of life. We are not focusing, for example, to measure like fatigue, or is someone able to function or to work. So this would be added value to that what we can measure or what we can get with this kind of systems, because patients want to live better, not just longer. We can improve the lab results, but the lab results are not real representations of how do you live, or are you fatigued, or can you work or not.
So we are still too focused on traditional clinical endpoints from your point of view, and not enough on aspects such as quality of life and daily functioning, if I get your point.
Yes, I mean, we do understand that formal clinical assessments and endpoints are super important for the evidence. But with that, we have now a unique opportunity to add something that could also show the things that were not measured until now. So in essence, we can say that clinical significance could be transformed into personal significance, because now we can really measure what matters to patients individually, and then see how this influences the outcome.
And how could this data be more systematically included and shape decision making, both in regulatory and HTA assessment?
So the first step should definitely be that a statistically significant data should be translated into something that has a meaning. So it's meaningful daily benefit for a patient. So we don't want to be here just to improve the clinical and statistical data. We want to have answers to questions like, will this continue? Is this something permanent? Is this something that will not go away and next day I will have again brain fog? Or, there are several questions that could be now answered with these new systems of real world data and real world evidence embedded into the system.
Great. Talking about, meaningful benefit and going a bit slightly more into the details. Can this kind of data strengthen post-marketing safety monitoring and also signal detection? And what limitation we should be cautious about?
Mm-hmm. Of course, the answer is yes, absolutely. Patient-reported data can strengthen the post-marketing surveillance and the signal detection techniques. They can strengthen the signal detection techniques like many ways. For example, we can have early detection and of emerging safety issues. This means that we know that there are patients report symptoms like they are not recognized in clinical settings, like, for example, this can include subtle neurological symptoms, fatigue, as Marco said, and mood changes, GI disturbances. And these are frequently underreported by clinicians, so they can trigger earlier signals by using these reported patient safety data. Also, they can capture adverse events that clinicians overlook. This means that patients describe the symptom severity, they describe duration, they describe daily impact. So this gives the regulator a richer picture of the adverse reaction they have. They can also support signal validation and prioritization. This means that when a safety signal emerges, from spontaneous reporting, the patient-reported data can confirm whether the symptom is widespread, or whether we clarify severity, or whether the time course, and we identify subgroups inside these adverse reactions that have these symptoms. Also, they can enhance post-marketing studies and in HTA supporting MEAs. They are particularly relevant for rare diseases, and because they are new, the patient-reported data are new. Maybe because we are pharmacovigilance persons, we can decide that this data can be used also in the WHO technique. We should use them formally to assess causality. These are not used, So there is a WHO causality assessment method, and it's not used, so maybe we can start using them. Concerning the limitations, of course there are limitations. We have variable data quality. This means that the patient reported data are incomplete most of the time, it's inconsistent, and they are influenced by recall bias and are affected by misunderstood medical terminology. Many symptoms are over-reported. For example, many patients report headaches, fatigue, and GI discomfort. We have selection bias. People who report symptoms tend to be younger and more literate more engaged and more literate digitally, so they can report. And we have also lack of standardized formats. I mean that we have different applications for different registries, different patient groups that collect data. So this means that we have also different reported frequencies, and this limits comparability and integration into regulatory systems.
Wow, I have nothing to add. Was really interesting. Also the use on the
causality.
And of course the quality of data is...
But of course this is my opinion, because we have a formal causality assessment method.
Yeah.
But this is my opinion as a pharmacovigilance expert.
That's very interesting. So in the EMA framework, when it comes to benefit risk evaluation and specifically to pharmacovigilance, how are real-world evidence currently considered, and is there something that you suggest, that there should be change or should be, better embedded at European level?
Well, in current days, it is primarily used as a safety lens. So while clinical trials tell us if a product can work, this data show us how it actually behaves in the wild. We can imagine like an animal comparing when it's in a cage in the zoo and then when it goes to the wild, to the real life. So this data is already used by PRAC to assess, monitor long-term safety, to detect rare adverse events, and to assess effectiveness of risk minimization measures. And Darwin EU is a good example of how this data is being integrated into the benefit risk assessments by EMA. So instead of waiting months or even years for a company to perform a study and then to submit a report, EMA now can query a massive network of over 100 million patient records. So this is really important, and this is already being used. But the issue is that this is mainly used for post-authorization monitoring, and it is still underused in initial approval phase. And this is where we need to change. We need to move from having real-world evidence as a use from supportive and move it to a decisive tool. But to do this, we face two main hurdles. It's fragmentation and trust. So we need to guarantee that data is standardized, and we need to harmonize it, because data comes from different data sources from different countries, and even in the same country, data is not collected the same way, because each registry collects the data for the purpose that is designed. So we need to make sure that data is consistent and comparable. And we also need to have a clear binding framework that defines exactly how data should be collected, how data should be evaluated, analyzed, and how it can be used. So we need to enhance data integration, to have interoperability between systems, and we need to build capacity among stakeholders, so they need to know how to use that data, and to guarantee also a better collaboration and transparency. This is also very important. So just to finalize, I think we need to move from watching products to validating them through continuous flow of data that comes directly from patients' bedside to the regulatory desk.
So if I can sum up what I heard up to now, health literacy, because probably we still have a lot to learn, from the patient side, or patient association also side, because we patient association collect a lot of data, but also clinician and also probably, you know, the regulatory bodies. A digital ecosystem that can really, because you were talking also about some digital, you know, if there is a digital trust, fragmentation, harmonization, and a methodological framework. I sum up a bit because now we are changing, you know, slightly the focus. So we have the market authorization, the EMA market authorization, but then we have the age technology assessment. So it's two, sometimes parallel, sometimes not, path that needs somehow to get to, you know, the final goal, that it's having, you know, new technologies or technologies that are effective, you know, and giving to patient the best option possible. Sofia, with the EU HTA regulation introducing a joint clinical assessment at EU level, so we are doing joint clinical assessment all together for the first time. How do you see the alignment between the regulatory evidence and the HTA requirements? And being really realistic, real-world data, can real-world data play a role in these two different assessment phases that then have to converge somehow?
Okay, first let's start with the first part of the question. Is there with the joint clinical assessments alignment between evidence and EU HTA requirements exists, but is improving. For example, it can improve, it can give common starting evidence base. This is for a label-enabling trials. Pivotal CTs and key secondary analysis remain the backbone for EMA and GSA reports. And the HTA regulation explicitly built GSAs on the same clinical evidence package as for marketing authorizations. We have a real and more structured dialogue because joint scientific consultations are meant to align regulators and HTA bodies expectations on specific endpoints, comparators, and study designs. And we have more methodological guidance and templates because, of course, we have templates for GSA methods and they are built there. But again, we have some parameters that misalignment exists. This means that we have misalignment in comparators, in endpoints, in timing and maturity of data, and national autonomy on value and price. And concerning your second question, can real-world data realistically play a role in EU GSAs? Yes, the answer is yes, but not as a magic bullet. This means that when it comes methodologically domesticated, RDV can fit into GSAs, but we use them to contextualize trial populations and practice. We use them as comparators and for indirect comparisons. We use them to measure long-term effectiveness and safety, and we use them to find some equity, to use equity in subgroups. But we have constraints because we know that we have methodological heterogeneity between member states. Some systems are mature, some systems are not mature for RWE data. We have this limit of timing because GSAs are triggered at market authorizations, submission and run on tight timelines. So RDV data do not exist at that time point. So we need to think if we use RWD data the right point in GSAs. And so we have also acceptance culture, because HTA bodies are traditionally conservative with not randomized evidence. So we need to, again, to rethink if we can use RWD and if we can use RWD data as primary comparative evidence.
Anna Sofia, methodological standards, Sofia just mentioned. What standards, according to you, must real-world evidence meet to be considered robust enough for both assessments, so regulatory and HTA assessment? And do you see any risk on the use of these non-randomized data in this assessment?
Well, data needs to be comprehensive, accurate, and representative of the target population. So it is essential that we have consistent protocols for data collection, and these need to be followed, and clear outcome measures, appropriate data analysis methods, additional statistical techniques, as Sofia said, need to be used to minimize any bias. So study designs, data sources, all the analyses that are used should be clear, documented, and reproducible to allow a verification by independent. When it comes to the risks, yes, there are some risks on relying on non-randomization data in joint clinical assessments. So the first one is the selection bias. So without randomization, we will have two groups that may be inherently very different, and this may lead to biased conclusions. So measurement bias is also a major risk, as real-world data is often noisy, it's messy. So we have differences in how hospitals collect data, not only between countries, but even in the same country. So this may lead to missing data or inconsistent endpoints, which will then make difficult for HTA bodies to assess the added value of a product. So additionally, it is also difficult to establish causality, as we have confounding by indications, because physicians will prescribe the newest, the more expensive products to those patients that have a more severe grade of the disease, and the opposite occurs to the healthiest ones. So it will be difficult to understand if the outcome is due to the product or the patient baseline condition. So to mitigate these risks, we must move toward the standardized prospective real-world evidence collection within the ERRNs. So we cannot just look back at all data. We must design registries to be HTA ready from the moment that the first patient enters.
Very clear. Thank you. We talk a lot about endpoints, Marco. We know how important they are. Are patients sufficiently involved and early enough to influence endpoints that then can feed in a proper way, as they were described, both the EMA approval and then the joint assessment for HTA?
So the honest answer is no. We are not yet included, so we are included. So we can point out on some good practices. For example, more than a decade ago, Professor Pia Gines invited us as ELPA to be part of the clinical research proposal and build up of a proposal of a clinical research. But at that time, we really didn't know what to bring to the table as patients. And it was his own idea, or he was also pushed by European Commission to include patients. So they followed this idea, including of patients, but they really didn't know what to do with patients by the table. So he was clever enough to build up a strategy together with the patient groups, how to improve the endpoints. And then we saw that it's really important to distinguish between endpoints and meaningful endpoints, meaningful for the patients and the quality of life. And this was easier to do with this kind of a conversation. Of course, the most important part I need to stress here, patients are there as non-experts, so we need space. So someone who is a principal investigator, he needs to do a right kind of a question for a patient or a right kind of a setting for inclusion of a patient. And then, of course, assess if this is improving the end result or not. As you rightly said, you know, this part of the table is like, you know, more energetic, more all around. And
she said messy.
Yeah, and that part of the table is more like structured. So how do you get this emotion and mess into a data that you can use? That is something that we will need to figure out in the next years to come, but is definitely easier to do because with the technology improvement, we have more real evidence, real world data that we can use to build up these systems. But definitely, if you include patients before, you can then define more meaningful outcomes, endpoints of the research than just doing it without patients, working with them from the beginning.
Should we use more social science for that? For, you know, try to make the messiness that she was saying? Because, you know, sometimes social science is not always included in, you know, how to measure. That was just a curiosity.
So the answer is yes. So we can definitely profit from that. But you need to also be aware what happened. So years ago, European Commission brought out two calls. So one was to teach patients how to understand drug development and how to participate in HTA clinical assessments. And the second one was for the researchers how to include patients and what is really meaningful data that they can really include. For that one, you had like just 2 universities apply and one got the grant, and then this was done. I think around 300 patients were educated there. And this one, no one applied. So it was a clear message that, you know, the experts community or clinical community, they do not see any need for adding additional layer of work to the work that they are already doing. But from the personal experience that we have at European Liver Patient Association, from now being involved in 20 different European Commission funded projects, we can see that the end results are really improving when there are meaningful results. And we can say something about the clinical protocol, we can say something about the endpoints that are just like endpoints from the clinical point of view that are important, but not from the patient view. So with the combination of both, we can get to a result that is better than just having one way or another.
And maybe I'm biased, but as ELPA, we can also see how measuring experience is extremely difficult. Because, I mean, having numbers sometimes is much easier, but it can be done. And it can be done in a proper way and in a scientific way. So it's science.
So our part should be to teach the patients how to provide the data that could be used. I was super stressed and annoyed at EMA when I saw some data from, you know, in the period of COVID. We had, I think it was 780,000 reports from patients in regards of the side effects, but 95 of them were never used because they were not done properly or the data was not good enough to be used in the process. So our part from the patient community is to teach the patients how to provide data that can be used. And from the regulatory side and clinical side of view, I think they are already prepared to include their data if they see that this inclusion will improve the end result.
Yeah.
Interrupt what you say. There is a simple answer to clean the mess. You go in the position of investigator as patient, you see their position, and as investigator, he must see your position also as a patient. So the mess is cleaned.
We talk about these two market authorization, and then the drug goes to the national. Even if we have a joint EU clinical assessment, the HTA decision, so the technology, if it's going to be sold or not, just to talk very simple, remain at national level. So it's a national decision. Are member states prepared to use real-world data in pricing and reimbursement decision or not?
This is a very difficult question because in the previous questions I answered yes, but in this question I will answer definitely no. Member states are not equally prepared and the variation is more wide than ever because this is the biggest obstacle in the EU. Even with data regulation coming into force, RWD data maturity is not harmonized. We have high readiness countries like Nordics and Netherlands and sometimes Belgium that have national HTA systems. They have complete coverage in their medicines. They have long-standing disease registries. They have strong data governance, and they use RDV complex. They perform complex RWD analysis. On the other hand, we have medium readiness countries like France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Austria, that they have some registries, not always interoperable. Fragmented, they have some fragmented regional data like countries like Italy and Spain mostly. They have HTA bodies that they accept the use of RWD data, but only in supportive ways. They are improving, but they are improving as countries. And we have the low readiness countries, I include mine also. Many smaller resource and constrained member states like Bulgaria, Romania, Cyprus, and parts of Central and Eastern Europe, that they have no national registries, they have no legal framework for the use of secondary use of RWD data, and they remain dependent on company-submitted evidence. This creates a structural inequity between the member states, and this gap between the Nordics and the smaller countries is wider than the gap between EMA and HTA bodies themselves, and in other words, EU-level progress risks amplifying national inequities unless capacity is leveled up. So most countries need to level up.
Anna Sofia, a very easy question for you. How can we avoid fragmentation? Because it's pretty clear that it's a big problem.
Yeah, it's a big problem. It can be avoided, but it will take some time because we need to establish a unified binding framework for the use of this data. Because we need to have consistent data standards, methodologies, and evaluation criteria. So this should be enforced by both EU-level regulatory and HTA bodies, ensuring that all member states follow the same common guidelines, and we need to establish criteria for collection, analysis, and interpretation of these data. So training programs will help to align these approaches, and also interoperable systems will be very important to guarantee this, because we need to have a consistency approach across all member states. So we don't just need to align approaches, we need to centralize the methodology while decentralizing the data access.
Marco, regarding the unequal access, regarding the use of real-world evidence at national level, it's clear that some countries are more advanced in using real-world evidence than others. That's exactly what Sofia was saying before. Do you see a risk of equal access for patients? Because at the end, is the access that it's important for patients.
So the system that we have now, it's super simple. So we have countries that have developed systems, and because they have more developed systems, they can use this data more quickly, and they can come quickly to the decision and to the reimbursement scheme. So this means that the patient who is living in one country will receive a drug or medicine really quickly. But just across the border, it can be like a few kilometers across the border. The second country with less capacity will not have this medicine available for another like few years or a decade. So if we decided that we are going to be together, joint in European Union and live together and improve the life of our citizens, surely like a geographically address could not be the defining factor for your health. You know, it should be, you know, the systems should be included and integrated in a way that if you live in European Union and wherever you are born, you have roughly the same access to the medicines or the medical procedures. Of course, this is easier said than done, but we are going in that direction. So in January 25, when we had this HTA regulations, this was a final point of 10 years of negotiating between countries what to do in this space. But we arrived to there. So probably we can also arrive to a point where geographical location will not be the defining factor for how healthy can you live your life.
I have a follow-up question / comment listening to all of you. The goal of the HTA regulation, of the HTA process, is assessing the value of a new technology, if we want to simplify that, no? And how much is important that value is also assessed by the patient and the patient experience, and is not simply an economical exercise. So how much is important, you know, having real-world evidence also at that, you know, at national level, at that very, very, very final step of the entire process.
So looking at me.
Yeah, sorry, I know it's complicated.
It's the question in our direction. So the answer is, of course, yes. So we need to be involved from the beginning, because then the end result will be better. How can we be involved? That depends on the national possibility of the national authorities to include patients. So at this moment, we see in the countries that regardless of the new legislation, they want to do whatever they can just to maintain their old way of doing things. So it's like, you know, you have a car which is a slow car, but you want to go 200 kilometers per hour. You cannot go 200 kilometers per hour with a slow car. You need to buy a new car or rearrange this car that you have. So something needs to be done. And this is posing a really big pressure on the authorities, on HTA bodies in the national countries. Of course, we are happily not to deal with that. We just want to be included, and want to be included in the right way, that the end result will be better because they included patients. And we can draw this, how to do this, from the countries that already are including patients in the procedures from the beginning.
Yeah, I'm asking because, you know, the concept of value in healthcare, it's very important, but it's not addressed, you know, explicitly. I think we need to address it much more, also from a patient perspective.
So if I can add just there, you know, sometimes you measure like clinical outcomes, you measure the ALT levels, and you see the improvement. And from clinical point of view, this is great because you are improving the life of a patient. But maybe you are not really improving the life of a patient, because patient is more fatigued, so he cannot go to work, he cannot function as a person. So this is clinically significant change, but maybe for a patient it's not so significant because it's lowering the quality of life.
What is exactly the added value there? Yeah.
So value should be reassessed from different points, not just economical point, but also from a patient point of view.
Slowly getting to the end. Anna Sofia, biggest regulatory risk if we move too quickly, because with data we always need to be careful.
I would say the biggest risk is the use of unreliable and biased data, because we now have different data sources across countries. So data comes from diverse and controlled sources, we need to work on and guarantee standardization, consistency, and accurate patient reporting. So without standardization validation, we risk a possible public health crisis that could destroy the trust in EMA's accelerated pathways. So if we rush too quickly without a unified methodology, different member states might interpret that messy data in a different way, and so this might lead to a fragmented market, where in one country one product might be considered deemed proven and in another as experimental, and this will create inequity for patients with rare diseases. So the risk isn't the data itself. The risk is if we abandon randomization too quickly without having real-world data analytical methods mature enough to replace the data.
Sophia, same from an institutional and structural point of view.
This is a very hard question because I come from an institute. I come from a national authority, and I was a part of EMA for a lot of years. But I will be that the biggest barrier is the fragmentation between EMA and the HTA bodies. This is not a lack of data, this is not a lack of methods, this is not a lack of political will. The core problem is that EMA and HTA bodies operate under different mandates, different timelines, different incentives, and different evidence cultures. Because they ask to the audience and themselves different questions. EMA asks the question, is the medicine safe and effective? And HTA bodies ask the question, is this valuable, cost-effective, or affordable in our system? So the question differs because the type of RDVW data differs also, and there is no shared framework that aligns these expectations. So the main fragmentation is between these bodies. Of course, HTA bodies nationally, they differ dramatically in capacity, and also we have no common rules for how RDV should be weighted in the 27 different interpretations. We have 27 different interpretations in EU how good RDV means. So we have a lot in our way to cover, I think.
Marco, I reverse the question. Which is the biggest risk for patients if we move too slow?
So the answer is very simple. From the time frame for liver patients, every time lost, it means liver function loss. So we can avoid cirrhosis, we can avoid transplantations, we can avoid getting liver cancer. So this can be avoided if we move quickly, and we need quickly decisions on what is beneficial for patients. Of course, we do agree that the decisions that are there should rely on evidence that is there on the firm ground. We should not just use every data that we have. But it's easier to say what is to be done. It's a little bit harder to do it. Can we do it? Yes, we can. So we showed with HTA regulations that we can harmonize things. It's not an easy process. It can be done. But from the patient point of view, it should be done very quickly. Because also if we are avoiding cirrhosis, transplantations, and liver cancer occurrences, we are lowering the cost of our healthcare systems. So at the end, it's very beneficial to go in that direction.
So as a final round, just imagine to be the president of the European Commission or somebody with a lot of power. Let's put it like that. What concrete step Europe should take, so in the next 3-5 years, so we have a bit of time, to ensure that this type of data can really influence the decision making both at EU and national level, and I would add meaningfully influence decision making. I will go as the table.
One concrete step is to build a single coordinated EU national evidence use framework that HTA bodies and regulators must apply, and not another database, not another pilot, a binding shared framework that says how exactly RWD and PROs are to be plant generated and weighed inside the EU?
Okay, I would say fully operationalize the European health data space by mandating that all ERN registries adopt the OMOP common data model to make sure that patient reporting outcomes become regulatory ready for use in joint clinical assessments.
So 2 parts. One is that European Union is using routine, standardized, validated patient-reported outcomes and link that to a reassessment at the regulatory level and also inclusion in the HTA decision updates, because we have a time where we can build up a learning system, not just one-time decision on HTA, but this could be a learning process where you use the data to improve the result.
So a lot of things to do, but a lot of hope. We can make it.
Yes.
That's the positive
Definitely.
message.
There is always hope.
That's good. That's true. So thank you for joining ELPA today, and let's get to work all together.
Thank you.
Thank you.